Hello, biologists. Today we're going to talk about ecology, which means we're going to talk about weather, climate, and biomes. But first, how do we study ecology? We can start by studying an organism, which is a single individual of a species, such as this pine tree. If we study more than one individual, then we have a population. So a population is all of one species in one place at one time. If we want to look at more than one species, then we have a community. So it could be all the different types of plants and all the different types of animals, but also the bugs. Everybody that's working together is the community, but it's focusing on the living things. Those are called biotic factors. So those are our three smaller groups going from smallest to larger. And then the even larger group is ecosystems. This is going to take into effect the abiotic factors that change how different places exist and interact with the living creatures that are there. If we look at all of the ecosystems together, we have the biosphere. The biosphere is all of life on Earth, all the places where life exists. So far, we only have one biosphere, and that is planet Earth. So what are abiotic factors? A, when you put it in front of a word, means not living. So these are non-living things that help figure out who can live in an environment and how they interact with the environment. For example, we're going to have energy sources. How much sunlight is there? Is there a lot of UV exposure or little UV exposure? Is there maybe chemical radiation as well? Is there a geothermal vent that you could use for energy, like at the bottom of the ocean? We're going to look at overall temperature. Is it cold? Is it hot? Is it frozen? Is it near this lava and absolutely boiling? We're going to look at the presence and abundance and type of salt in the water or different types of ions dissolved in the water and how that affects who can grow there. So salt water is very different than fresh water, basic water, acidic water. All of that makes a difference in what kind of plants can grow in your ecosystem. We're going to look for nutrients, how much nitrogen, phosphorus, how much carbon dioxide. All those things are used by plants to make tissue, and then those tissues of the plants will help support all the animals that live in this area. And other inorganic matter like the rocks. What kind of dirt? What kind of, is there glass on this beach? Like what kind of sand is there? All of those things matter as well. For aquatic systems, we want to think about dissolved oxygen, what the current is like, what the tide is like, are there heat vents, how salty is the salt water? The ocean is not consistently salinic. It has different concentrations of salt in different locations. For terrestrial ecosystems, we're also going to look at the incident of fire, the incident of wind, the incident of volcanic eruptions, of earthquake, anything that could change an ecosystem drastically. And for all of it, we're going to think about natural disasters like tornadoes or tsunamis or floods. How could those affect an ecosystem? If you are a critter that lives on the edge of a river, you have to adjust to when there is a high volume of water versus a low volume of water seasonally. So all that matters. And I want you to take some time thinking about abiotic and biotic factors. So I'm going to show you three habitats. In your notes, because I assume you take notes during these lectures, please make a list of all the abiotic and biotic factors you can for this ecosystem. Go ahead and pause the video. Aim for at least like 5 of each. What about for this ecosystem? The abiotic and biotic factors, aim for like 5 each. Pause the video, and when you're ready, resume. And lastly, this habitat. How are the biotic factors and abiotic factors different? So the point of this is that we have 3 very different habitats. We had a temperate forest, we had a desert, and we have a kelp forest. The 2 forests have a lot of plants. You could see those. That helps us think about the biotic factors. The desert, the plants were not so visible. You could see some, but you know from your background experience what kind of things live in a desert. You have seen examples of desert critters before. The point I'm trying to make is each of these ecosystems is wildly different, yet there's some trends in what kind of biotic and abiotic factors exist in each. So let's think a little bit more deeply about how our ecosystems are different. We want to compare weather and climate because we're going to use these two terms as different things. In our common day vernacular, we often use climate and weather interchangeably, and in biology, that doesn't work, and we want to break that habit. So weather is short-term atmospheric conditions in an area. It's usually measured over 48 hours. If you measure it longer than 48 hours, we can make predictions, but they're not all that reliable. So it's really only 48 hours long. We're going to look at temperature, precipitation, wind, humidity, cloud cover, maybe even pollen count, all the things that you see in your weather app when you try and prepare what to wear for the day. In contrast, climate is measured over long periods of times, decades or thousands of years. We're going to be looking at patterns of solar radiation, so sun exposure. We're going to look at average temperatures, not daily temperatures. We're going to be looking at global movement of air and water, rainfall averages per month or year or decade. And this is what causes the ecosystems to exist on Earth's surface. So this is really a denoter of what can live where and why. So one of the things that I think about with weather is seasonality. It's really different in summer than it is in winter. Why even are there seasons? There are seasons because the Earth is not perfectly up and down, it is tilted. So here we have the orbit of the Earth. Our Earth itself spins around on its axis. One spin is 1 day. The time it takes for the Earth to go all the way around the sun in its orbit is a year. But because it's at an angle like this, it's not pointed straight up and down for the North Pole and the South Pole. Instead, our equator is tilted. And so at some points of the year during our orbit, the northern hemisphere is more pointed toward the sun than the southern hemisphere. So more of the southern hemisphere is pointing away. You can see this in this sun shadow line right here. If we divide our Earth from top to bottom here, more of the top half, the northern hemisphere, is in the light, and more of the southern hemisphere is in the dark. Why does that matter? It matters because the sun is constantly pulling out solar radiation, which is hitting us, but because the Earth is a sphere, the solar radiation doesn't affect each part of it the same. So sun rays that are hitting the Earth straight on, they are much warmer and much more absorbed by our Earth. Sun rays that hit the Earth at this angle, most of them kind of roll off. So these are cooler temperatures, and you see that. You know the North Pole is cold and the South Pole is cold. That's because the solar radiation is not getting a direct hit because our Earth is rounded. So it kind of rolls past it. These rays are not as strong. It's a cooler temperature. These rays hitting the Earth directly, very strong. So here we have summer in the northern hemisphere because our tilt has more of the northern hemisphere pointed toward the sun. And then as our Earth rotates around the sun, our tilt doesn't move. And so in winter, more of the southern hemisphere is now pointed toward the sun, and it's getting more of that direct radiation. So in winter, in the northern hemisphere, it's cold. But in winter, in the southern hemisphere, it's warm. And that's because of this tilt, which changes the direct angle that the sun rays are hitting Earth. So more sun rays on the southern hemisphere in winter, more sun rays on the northern hemisphere in the summer. We can see this if we look at a map of temperatures on Earth. Here we have up to 35 degrees Celsius, and then here we have really cold -2 degrees Celsius. So all of this here is the equator. This is the hottest part of the Earth. This is hot because it's getting the direct solar radiation from the sun. This is cooler because the sun's radiation is hitting it on its edge and rolling off. Because you think of waves of photons as being both a particle and a wave. And so it's kind of just like skidding the surface, and it's not able to create as much heat as a direct hit of sunlight would. Now, We have a lot of green, a lot of brown. There's patterns here that we're going to discuss, like why is this strip often brown and this strip often green? Um, and first, we're going to talk about these patterns of cold. So up here, where it's really chilly a lot of the time, animals have to figure out how to exist in that climate. And so we have a lot of adaptations for cold weather that I think are worth discussing. One of them are Arctic ground squirrels. So here's a cute Arctic ground squirrel. They are going to enter a state of torpor. Torpor is not hibernation, it's a type of hibernation. True hibernation, like you do not wake up whatsoever. In torpor, you wake up periodically. So these ground squirrels enter torpor and their metabolic rate drops, their body temperature drops. They go from 99 degrees Fahrenheit to about 27 degrees Fahrenheit, which is below freezing, like that's really cold, except they can't last like that. And so every few days, they're going to work up their body heat, they're going to shiver, they're going to use their fat reserves, and they're going to bring themselves back up to temperature. And then they're going to dip down for a few weeks. And then over 2 days, they'll bring themselves back up to temperature, and then they'll dip back down. And they're going to do this for several months at a time so that they can use less resources in the winter when it's really hard to find food. Here's another example. We have grizzly bears. Grizzly bears also do torpor, so it's not true hibernation. But before they enter torpor, they go into hyperphagia, which means excessive eating. So during this excessive eating period, they can gain 3 to 4 pounds of fat per day. Every year before winter, there's a fat bear contest on the internet where you can vote for the best fat bear that's packing on the most fat for its torpor session. While it's in torpor, its heart slows from 45 beats per minute to about 10. What's really cool is if a female bear has a fertilized egg before she goes into torpor, she can't gestate that baby and survive the winter. So she'll put that fertilized egg on hold and it will not implant. And then in the spring, when she comes out of torpor, it will implant and then she will gestate that baby. So she can pause her pregnancy to survive the winter, or for the embryo to survive the winter. Arctic terns also have an incredible adaptation to winter. They migrate. Arctic terns have the longest migration. They're going to go from all the way up north here down to their breeding grounds in Antarctica. That's about 12,000 miles. And they do this every year. So by moving locations, they can avoid the coldest parts of winter. And one of my favorite adaptations for existing in these cold climates that are affected by less of the direct solar radiation is emperor penguins. They have to snuggle, they have to cuddle. It's technically called a huddle, but I like calling it a cuddle better. And they're going to use this cuddling behavior to survive in some really harsh conditions. As we're looking at the Earth and we're thinking about the poles being colder, we have two general rules that we see with body forms. One is called the Bergmann's rule. And at the Bergmann's rule, the closer you go to the equator, the bigger organisms get. So if you're up here where it is generally kind of warm, you have all of the temperature you could use. These are Galapagos penguins. So they have 70-degree temperature all year long. These are smaller penguins because they don't need to insulate their bodies from the cold. Then we have South African. This is in the coast of South America, but South African or South American penguins, these are from Argentina. Their body forms are going to be bigger because they're closer to the pole. They need more body form, more body structure to keep themselves warm. And then we have our Antarctic penguins, something like the emperor penguin that you're going to watch in that video. They are stout, they are chubby, they have to have insulation to exist near the poles. And we see this body trend of lots of organisms as well. We also have Allen's rule that organisms that are closer to the poles, higher altitudes, they're going to have shorter, thicker limbs, and they're going to have reduced extremities. This is an effect of the cold well. So here you have a desert hare. This desert hare has huge ears. It has these huge ears to try and reduce its overheating. And so it loses heat through these ears. This is like its evaporative cooling area. Then as you get closer and closer to the poles, you have your Arctic hare. Its ears are going to be reduced because it wants to keep that heat. It wants to conserve its heat. Same thing for these canine faces. These could be foxes. You have your desert finnick fox, and it's going to have bigger ears for more heat loss. And then as you go closer to the poles, smaller reduced ears for less heat loss. These changes in climate also lead to a pattern that we call ocean upwelling. Ocean upwelling is extremely important for the oceans. What happens is that wind creates this current across the offshore down over the ocean. And as it creates this current, it makes the water react in response. And so it brings up deep, cold, nutrient-rich water from the bottom and twirls it like a big spiral. So this allows nutrients to cycle up from the bottom, hence the name upwelling. We also see this seasonally in lakes. We call it aquatic turnover. In aquatic turnover, you're going to have a change in the density of water. So in the winter, water is densest at 4 degrees, and it's going to be protected by a layer of snow or ice up at the top. So the coldest water will sink down to the bottom. In summer, the same is true. Outside now, you have hot water, you have hot air, the cold water will sink to the bottom. But in spring, as this thaws and gets warmer, you're going to have a changeover. So water will get that melted ice and it will become cold, but because it's cold, it will sink. And so warm water will get pushed up and become cold and sink and then get warm and pushed up. And so you get like a convection cell here that twirls the water around and brings the nutrients and the oxygen throughout your lake or your pond. The same thing will happen in summer. Warm water will displace the cool water. The warm water will warm up and cool toward the edges and cool as it goes deeper, which will push the cold water up, and you'll get these convection cells. We have an effect on Earth that's called the Coriolis effect. It's based on the different radiuses of the Earth, given that it's a sphere. I'm going to let this video explain it to you, and then we're going to talk about convection cells. So convection cells are partly affected by the Coriolis effect. If you want to pause the video and go watch that first, I think that's a great idea. But here's the general thought behind it. We have patterns of wind flowing on the Earth. That's the Coriolis effect. And then we have these patterns of air rotation in chunks going from the equator toward the pole. These are called convection cells. Let's look at this diagram first. Here we have the equator. In the equator, you're going to have a lot of warm, wet water. That warm, wet water is going to rise. And as it rises, it will cool. And this continues. So this cooling air is pushed out of the way by the warmer air that's rising. And as the cooling air is pushed sideways, it starts to condense and it drops all of its rain. And then by the time it gets up here to about 30 degrees, it has no water to drop. And so we see rainforest in this wet, condensed, warm area, and we see desert on the opposite side of each convection cell. So one is going in a clockwise form and the other one is going anti-clockwise, but the pattern is the same. The two cells that are on the opposite sides of the equator are called the Hadley cells. The one that would be just above it is called the Ferrel cell. So here we have the same diagram, but showing us a little more. We have the equator. We have that warm rising air. It's going to start to cool. It's going to drop all of its rain. And then we have dry air sinking to the bottom, and it's going to push that warmer air sideways. So we get a rotation called the convection cell. Here are our Hadley cells. They go all the way across. So these are the same as these ones over here. These Hadley cells are abutted by the Ferrel cells. And then at the top, we have two polar cells. So two polar cells on each side. Here's another way to look at it. In a perfect Earth, it would look like this. Our polar high, we have our spinning air circulations. We have our westerlies, we have our trade winds, and then this intertropical convergence zone is all hot, wet, lots of water, lots of rain, causing those convection cells to drop all the rain and then create that warm, dry air to displace it as it cools. And so here's your Hadley cell dropping the rain, then cooling off and being dry and continually rotating. Here's their other Hadley cell, and this is showing you that it's a continual donut shape. So the Hadley cells are on either side of the equator all the way through. This is the actual Earth. So note that there are patterns that are not perfectly straight. Instead, they kind of swell and shrink, and that's based on the format of our continents and the shape of our oceans. So it doesn't stay all pretty in lines like this. It's more wobbly in real life. Above the Hadley cell, you have your Ferrel cell and then your polar cells. We have another feature that helps affect where we get lots of rain. It's called the rain shadow effect. So here's the Cascade Mountains. Mount Hood is part of the Cascade Mountains. We have this moisture-filled air coming in from the ocean. It's going to go up the mountain. As it goes up the mountain, the water is going to cool and it's going to condense and it's going to rain out. So all of our rain is getting squeezed out as it's crossing the mountain range. By the time the clouds move to the other side of the mountain range, most of the water in the air is gone. And so the air is dry and we have more arid desert conditions on the opposite side of mountain ranges from where the ocean is. You can see this on Google Maps. So here, this is Gresham where we live, where our school is. We have the ocean over on this side, and we have all this lush lush, wet forest full of rain that we're used to. And as those clouds move over the mountain range, they drop all the rain, and you can see this rain shadow effect where we have desert on the other side of the Cascade Range. It's really fun to look at Google Earth and go find mountain ranges on the coasts and then see the rain shadow effect right on the other side of them. Our climate is also affected by ocean currents. So here we see the patterns of ocean currents, and these are consistent. They generally continue. They're caused by changes in temperature, changes in salinity, changes in wind patterns, and these swirls right here create these systems that kind of keep things interlocked into the center. And so here we have another swirl, here we have another swirl. That explains why we have our Great Pacific Garbage Patch. So our Great Pacific Garbage Patch is a massive 100,000 tons, which is equivalent to 740 Boeing 777s. And it is made of about 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic. Why does it exist? Because plastic got into the ocean and does continually in huge amounts every day. But because that ocean current swirls around it, and much like when you stir your coffee or something and you see the bubbles swirl in the center, they kind of group up in the center, that ocean current creates this twirl which sucks all of the garbage together in the center. Every time I see data about how big the Great Pacific Garbage Patch is, I'm amazed. This is to scale. It is huge. So here's the United States as comparison. It is a massive amount of garbage. Now let's get into the trends with our climate. We can identify patterns of different types of ecosystems based on solar radiation, so the amount of sunlight they're getting and how intense that sunlight is based on whether or not it's the rounded part of the Earth or directly pointed at the sun. Moisture levels, which is how much rain we're getting. We know that's affected by the Coriolis effect and those convection cells. And rain shadows, local things that will cause more rain or less rain. And ocean currents are playing a role in this. Here's a generalized pattern. Up in the north, it is cold. There is a type of biome called the tundra. We're going to talk about it in more detail. It is very, very chilly. There's all these areas that are always frozen. So those are shown as white. Here is Antarctica, always frozen. Then you have blue, which is marine. You're going to then have taiga or boreal forest. So a nice strip of that. Then you're going to have temperate forest going through the east coast and a little bit through the Rockies, all of this part of Europe. Grasslands, we have a lot of grasslands. Savanna or tropical grasslands. So this is going to be here and a huge part of Africa, the continent of Africa, India and China. And then we have freshwater, which is really neat. There's very little of it. It's great to see the mighty Mississippi, and then we have all of these lakes. We can talk about our biomes using multiple maps. So here we have another map. The colors are different, but the patterns are the same. And then we can also talk about biomes by organizing based on moisture and temperature. So here we have wet to dry, and we have hot to cold. So if you are wet and hot, you are a rainforest. Are you hot and dry? You are a desert. Are you in between? Then you are a savanna. If you're decreasing in your temperature, we have temperate grassland, temperate forest, and then desert. Deserts can be quite cold as well. If you're decreasing in your temperature even more, you're going to have taiga. And then you get to the coldest, you have tundra. Note that these in the middle are right in the same range of moisture, but we have extremes for the two sides of our pyramids down here. Here's another way to visualize it. We can table it where we have our different types of biomes, our different temperatures, our different rainfalls, and what kind of vegetation lives in each. Or we can graph it again. Now we've swapped sides. So the average temperature is on the x-axis and the average precipitation, which is rain, is on the y-axis. What's the trend again? Are you hot and wet? It's a hot and dry, it's a desert. Hot and wet, it's a tropical forest. Cold is always the tundra. Boreal is the next coldest. All right. Let's go through some of these different types of biomes and talk about their specifics. Tropical rainforests are incredible because they have the highest biodiversity of living organisms. Something that's interesting about them, they're near the equator. There's no winter. It's usually 70 degrees all year long, but there are two seasons. It's just rainy or dry. But even when it's dry, it's still rainy. But when it's rainy, it's like really rainy. Because it's on the equator, there isn't any seasonal change. It's always pointed pretty much directly at the sun, and there are 12 hours of daylight all the time, all year long. This soil in tropical rainforests is poor and acidic, and that's because there's so much living there and so much rainfall that if something does die and start to decompose, it's used up so quick. And all of that water leads to heavy leaching. Next, we're going to have a savanna. Savanna are found in warm or hot climates where there is a good amount of rainfall, but the rainfall is limited to a certain period of time. So there's a long period of drought after that. That period of drought brings wildfires, and it also makes these plants adapted to existing without consistent water supply. Savannas cover about half the surface of the continent of Africa, as well as large parts of Australia, South America, and India. It's a big habitat. Lots of different animals live in this type of habitat. Really beautiful. Then we have the deserts. Deserts cover about a fifth of the Earth's surface, and they occur in places where there is little rainfall, so very little rain. These animals and plants have to be adapted to having very little type of water, but they have really incredible adaptations to it. And the life in the desert can be quite incredible and numerous despite the lack of water. Then we have chaparral. Chaparral is a Mediterranean climate, which means that there's hot, dry summers and mild, wet winters. There's going to be lots of shrubs and small trees, lots of types of like Manzanitas grow in this area, and oaks do pretty well in this area. We see this a lot in California, so the chaparral is important to the California coast. Then we have temperate grasslands. Temperate grasslands are not going to be too hot, not going to be too cold, and shockingly, they have a lot of grass. So grass is the dominant vegetation, but grass is also really supportive for a lot of life. They're divided into whether or not the grass is tall, that's going to be a prairie, or if the grass is short, that's called a steppe. We have temperate forest. Temperate forest is in eastern North America, northeastern Asia, western and central Europe. It's defined by distinct seasons, so it gets all four of those seasons. And there's a lot of trees. There's a big forest in this biome. Because it gets these really cold periods, the soil doesn't get leached out very often, and there's not like intense competition for decomposition. And so these soils tend to be very fertile. And it says enriched with decaying litter. By litter, they mean leaf litter. So a lot of these trees in temperate forest are going to be deciduous. They're going to drop their leaves. So you have a full forest worth of leaves on the ground every year, and that adds a lot of nutrients. Our next one is boreal forest. This is also called taiga. Taiga is really chilly. It's got a divide between moderately warm summers, but long, cold, dry winters. So if you look at this picture, you can see that the types of trees that grow here are going to be evergreen. The soil is thin. There's not a lot of leaf litter because evergreen trees are not dropping their leaves. It's going to be nutrient poor and acidic, but still really cool animals and plants and bugs live in these areas. And our last terrestrial biome is tundra. Tundra is the coldest of all, so right up next to those poles. It's going to have a frost-molded landscape, hella low temperatures, low rain because everything is frozen, little nutrients, and a short growing season. It also has this thing called permafrost. Permafrost is a layer of soil that is perpetually frozen. It's frozen forever. And so it just stays there frozen, and no one really gets to use frozen material because the water's not available. Oregon has our unique system where we have a variation in precipitation because of that rain shadow effect. So here we can see all of the areas that get a lot of rain. We have some temperate rainforest, which is pretty cool. It gets enough rain to count as a rainforest, but it's temperate. And so lots and lots of rain all along the coast. Then we get the valley. This is going to be where we grow all of our grapes. So this is the Willamette Valley here. So it's a different habitat because it gets a different amount of rainfall. Then we see the rain shadow effect where we get more rain on the Cascades, leading to this desert condition out in eastern Oregon. So Oregon has an incredible variety of different biomes. We can also look at the tree cover related to that. So some trees are going to be more adapted to those really wet conditions, like the hemlock and the spruce along the coast. We're also going to have mixed conifers that do well at high elevation. So that's in our Cascade range. And then we're going to have a lot of juniper, which is adapted to the desert conditions of eastern Oregon. Ponderosa pine, you'll note, is also in eastern Oregon, and western larch. Those can maintain in these habitats pretty well. They are pretty hardy. Let's talk about marine biomes next. Now, marine biomes are characterized by the salinity of the water, which means the salt content of the water, how deep the water is, how much light penetrates the water, and how much the water is moving. When we think about marine biomes, we can break them into different parts. First, you have the photic zone. The photic zone is where you have bright sunlight. You can see everything. It's pretty clear and nice. Then you're going to have the aphotic zone. Light doesn't penetrate very well. That's what the A means in front of photic, photic referring to photon. And below that, you have the abyssal zone, which is just dark, dark, dark. Like no light can get down there. All of these together are the pelagic, and they are part of the ocean zone. If we look over close to the shore, we have the Nearthrithic and the intertidal zone. So the intertidal zone is going to be right where you have the high tide and low tide. And then the Nearthic is defined by the continental coast. So right when it starts to drop off, then you get into the ocean zone. In our intertidal zone, we have a lot of our friends that we talked about last term. So here we have Echinodermata, and we have our sea anemones. So a really cool amount of organisms live in the intertidal zone, but they have to be adapted to being submerged fully in salt water and then exposed to air. So the habitat here is constantly changing. We're also going to see a lot of our bivalves, so clams and mussels are also in the intertidal zone. Next, we're going to have coral reefs. Coral reefs are made of a calcium carbonate skeleton and coral organisms. Coral organisms are in the phylum Cnidaria, so they are cute little invertebrates. Coral reefs are very diverse, and they are in warm, shallow waters all across the globe. Coral reefs are one of the organisms that are in danger with our changing habitat that we'll talk about soon. Then we have lakes and ponds. They can be itty bitty or they can be massive. Here I have a picture of Crater Lake. Crater Lake in Oregon is a caldera. So this was a volcano that collapsed and filled with rainwater over time. They are, most of them, remnants of a glaciation event, which is when a glacier moved through and scoured up areas and created depressions that then filled with water. Some of them have limited species diversity. Some of them have really high species diversity. Some are isolated, some are connected. They're really highly variable, but they have 3 different zones, which is based on how far you are from the shoreline. So that will change based on the type of fresh water you're in as well. Lakes and ponds, highly variable. Rivers and streams are going to be moving water. They're often connected up to a water source like a glacier, and they're moving toward larger bodies of water. So a stream goes toward a river goes toward the ocean. They can be found everywhere. The interesting characteristics are that at the mouth of the river, where you have the source of the water is cooler, it's clearer, it has a higher oxygen content, and that will change as it goes down and gets bigger and goes toward the ocean. And lastly, we have wetlands. So wetlands are going to be areas where they have a lot of seepage of moisture. If it's an estuary, it's going to be saltwater and freshwater mixing. Wetlands don't have to be estuaries. They can be totally freshwater. In this group, we're also going to have marshes and swamps and bogs. The species that live here are adapted to very wet conditions. They're called hydrophytes, so they grow in water, and they also have to deal with a high humidity. Amphibians love wetlands because they need to lay their eggs in water that is still and not salty. So wetlands are important for our amphibian populations. I hope that was interesting. Have a great day and email me anytime with questions. Bye.